The Grand Master Monk, the old tiger Ton Po, comes to life in his epic poem, self-taught martial artist through introspection, disciplined mentor of many disciples, fighting across the lands and jungles of Kunark, defending all that is sacred, wielder of the celestial fists, and master of his weapon, Ton Po's bow stick of understanding, in his fleeting escape from the Ixar, on his fateful point of no return to battle the fierce undead dragon Trakenon. The Legend of Ton Po by T. F. Lanning, written from 4/17/2014 to 10/15/2014. No one knows the lore of the Po, the great Ton Po, the untold legend. It's a mystery I will do on my own now, from being a monk wants to know. I couldn't finish part of this, part just after his village, until things in life unfold, though it was only one day to finally be fervent on it. Days and weeks went on, and as I added to his legend, the times in life and the one I love with all soul experienced things, faith, hope. I could never do all this without her. I'd be back, scared in the dark like I was for all those years in lone pain. But now reveals its reason. Suffering is a mystery the universe tries to help you realize and unravel, to find enlightenment, joy, and inspiration as you travel upon the earth. For every curse there is an opposite blessing of worth, a holiness of soul, a liberation and the spirit of inspiration we search, and beyond. Ton Po, sacred Ton, the Po, the fighting of the envenomed Trakenon. Its dreaded ghost fights on every respawn. Now you know why it's so far down in the dungeon. So Ton Po has his moment of glory. Again and again, the rivets of Frog guard this solo monk's battle. He went deep down long ago alone to defeat the dragon. Old man Ton wouldn't feign this, one of many battles, one he knew he could not leave. It was his village's wish. His wife gave him a special nettled petal pouch and an amber stone before he would go, not knowing what would happen in the days to come. Like a Zubu tribe, crushed and broken, hidden, reformed, and built several times always. He was the Zubu Baba, my own old maestro and comforter, a woo in spirit, one who saved me in my time. A good old aging monk himself, though he's silent now. But the Ixar came from afar and closed in. It was the end, and Ton Po saw his fading village get overrun. Through the jungle he had gone, the only flames burned in his heart. He would face a great creature deep, a vile dragon, yet could not hold this ground the Ixar warriors found, armed heavy with razor-edged shan tok, and dire armaments to crush and bring ruin to the monk in his home, or towards old Sibyllus they would cut a swath. A silence fell, a somber echo where no wind would stir. Fleeting memories of his family, his amaranthine training, a distant meditation close within, of souls praying, now being driven back swinging and kicking, at merciless foes seething, with loud roars of sinister hissing, shields and blades falling, while he many times for his power mended. The embattled hermitage could not be continually defended. Never to return to his home, nothing left of his own. Ton Po's bow staff, already what it was when found. No trimmer rap needed, more than ever now to be in understanding, though that bow staff had no name till it would be found, the wicked dragon defeated. Ton Po ran through the overgrown jungle into the mist surrounding Ixar monuments, a burial ground of imposing statures carved by nameless royal Ixar artisans, perhaps by even Froglock unknown, leaving only the memory of warlords of long ago, majestic statues, grasping their weaponry, frozen to the last, the great fighters of the past gazing into the endless shroud of vaporous clouds close to the ground, where Ton Po vaulted with his bowstick over the tombstones. The gray, cold, sculpted images broken now, worn and ravaged, their vigil of resolve forever standing through eroded stratum, the ghosts that roamed Trakenon's teeth, existed to serve a fallen empire, centuries lost now, and still a duty at their posts, wandering the area around the forgotten burials, a vast, ancient graveyard of their resting place, where old ancestor phantoms dwelled, ill omens in the fog, whispering of the monk's fate, tempting gloom among the eerie graves, that led the monk past one distinctly ornate, where above the moon illuminated full in the ether high aloft the astral plains. Tom Poe, as he passed by the many graves, saw a stone, flat and placed out of the way, a burial not a part of the monuments to the fallen Ixar and their kin. In silence it had always been, the ghost unresting, materializing near him as he paused from his run, looking through the fog. The phantasm stared at the monk, and Ton Po thought who it could have been. The ghost, silent, drifted in unrest. Ton Po could not recollect. He knew this ghostly watcher was a soul important in his life's tests in the past. The fog slowly shrouded the materialized form until it faded away, and Ton Po leapt over the tombstones to make his escape from the many Ixar hunting the monk down, the jungle he knew like no other, his village ruined and who he lived for gone this day. Beyond the graveyard, across rivers skipped Ton Po. In the deepest bog of no hopes he tread towards. Skipping to save energy he went on. The flora had been the same when he was young, the flowery mantraps still as voracious, their ever-blooming petals and tendrils unraveled, exotically colored, hungry for the essences of ill-fated travelers, lurked unique, hidden like natural living plants among the still trees, quiet branches intertwined in the sunless, misty canopy. Ton Po walked with his bow-stick through the murky swamp, sometimes too deep, vaulting out of varied depths onto the green moss, divinely placed stones, dead logs and bog reeves. He saw the expanse past the trees, where great structures of hanging webs twined with peat, fungus, and leaves. This place he knew once much more free, now silent, a broad, still, empty, aqueous swamp filled his sight past everything unmoving. He took a last step, preparing to strafe the area, feeling the deep of the swamp of no hope, perhaps too willing to sink his enchanted and quick feet into that endless deep, a dangerous edge he strided through, as if he knew where to step, not once in the swamp to his knees. The swamp bubbled, and dark birds from their branches flew away. Ton Po saw the wretched hangman rise from its hidden depths, where it upon all flesh preyed. He heard the water flow in the dark, endless expanse beyond, knowing it was the aqueous subterranean cavern toward the teeth of Trachanon. The hangman was a mutant mantrap of an overgrown plant that hid its tendrils from the prying eyes of all it had hunt that roamed. A dark cloaked figure appeared behind a tree, its shadows occluded by the darkness that blended it into the scene. The hangman swung its lengthy, rasping tendril at Ton Po, rapping on his bow-stick as he twisted it fast. A corkscrew, an expeditious celebration of souls to sip of the essence within. Striking back, he regained control of his weapon's wrath. He leaped into the mossy soup up to his shoulders. He swam fast to the hangman's roots, and as the mutant mantrap's vegetation swiped at Ton Po to consume the brave monk of renown, Ton Po reached the roots and pummeled the plant's beginnings, where it sapped and drained the lands it moved upon. Swiftly, as the tendrils reached down, he dodged their mortal blows, desperate to crush the monk. He snapped the life-giving roots the hangman used to entangle its prey. When it had finished its meal, the bones gathered in the mossy maw, endless skeletal remains of the past victims of this massive thing. As Ton Po strafed, outmaneuvering the dying beastly plant, he encircled the creature, wondering what sentience led it to live as it did. Bones began to spill from the chopped and withering roots of the hangman, Ton Po's bowstick unable to stun, as his celestial fist in tranquility began to sing. He whittled the plant down to size, Spiked bones now exposed, creatures of long ago showing through the mutant man-trap's guts inside. Tonpo sank every time he quickly hit and moved through the swamp. The flowering beast was getting weak from its ceaseless swings Tonpo leapt away from. The hangman grasped Tonpo finally, its beautiful flowering head, blue, yellow, red, and black, sought to devour the embattled monk while its wavering form still remained attached. The shadow had moved from behind the distant tree, levitating over the swamp, its feet leaving trails in the water between the reeds. The shadow threw bone shards into the deep, quickly summoning skeletal remains of forgotten soldiers from behind. Tonpo struggled with the man-trap mutant's rasping and slippery green arms fighting on. Though near the sharp alien-like bones jagged in the gathering fog he moved away from. The shadow, a cloaked necromancer, commanded the undead that surround to attack the hangman, to leave nothing but the bones within. They ran towards, tearing at the monstrous plant mercilessly, while the enigmatic necromancer floated in the mist. He defoliated the beast with his magic as he had steadily drift. The hangman desperately attacked, seeking now to consume Tonpo especially, as if the undeath it knew to not be energizing food. Tonpo fought to release himself from the hangman's grasp, as the necromancer whispered in the still cold of the swamp, a gangrenous touch of Zamul, that twined and sunk deep into the roots of the beast's last path. Slowly, with motions of his hands, the necromancer struck at the very core of the doomed monster, boiling its wrathful blood, seeking to empower itself in its last throes of death. The necromancer sent all he could in the ways of macabre magic to bring down the monster's unrest. Tonpo reached for an unusually long spine, the tailbone very sharpened to a deadly point. Some unknown creature that once roamed the lands. With sinew and quick motion he allowed the hangman to inhale his body. The necromancer's minions were keeping the mutant busy, cutting much of Tonpo free, though they were oblivious of their fight, and who was entangled by the hangman now, its life essence doomed by the necromantic forbidden rites. The vampiric bloom slowly tried to digest its foe, and Tonpo felt his life waning even to glancing blows. He reached inside the core of the hangman, the spiked, deadly spine under his arm. The necromancer praying at this point that the alien plant's vile, deadly essence within the hangman would not touch the mortal monk's sacred form. The skeletal minions nearby, tearing through the baleful and toxic plant's rooted support. Tonpo reached inside the hangman, the mutant plant at its end, and saw the deadly essence, dark green and acidic reddish sap, and extended the sharp spine, striking down deep and upwards, with the jagged tail end. The hangman began to convulse, its large blossoming petals like colorful sheets in the wind, that once drifted here in the breeze. An old home it was to Tonpo. He grasped with both hands onto the old edge-ridden spine and drove it into the core of the hangman's needed scythe. The necromancer snapped his fingers, and a sound like a wave of breath, an echo that sighed towards his undead pets, beckoned them to stand steadfast aside. Unmoved, the skeletal apparitions, cavorted bones that collapsed calmly at the necromancer's bidding, only their skulls left, floating now in the swamp's slimy green. The shadow stepped toward the hangman, the mighty, vile, mutant man-trap, and cast a spell, a conglaciation of bone, a glacial whisper that penetrated the plant's innards, freezing the now dripping core, the essence covering Tonpo. The necromancer telekinetically opened the once deathly maw to so many foes and pulled the mighty tiger Tonpo out. His bow stick had been wrapped in the tendrils of the grim trap, and came free, falling next to Tonpo, regaining his focus, but by the noxious gas the plant emitted after his struggle had passed, remained unconscious in dream. The necromancer reached inside of the vile thing and carved out the core of the plant with a sacrificial kriss, floating all the while with a dead man floating at the base of the hangman. The shadows of the swamp turned into night as will-o'-wisps lit the darkness. The necromancer, perceived to be a dark elf, reached into the vile maw of the hangman's husk and pulled out with a refreshing sound the now frozen blue core of the plant, twisting the embedded spiked spine out from the bottom, slowly turning, as if the heart of the beast was that of a precious treasure to the cloaked being. The necromancer pulled the spine free, dropping it into a robe spread out that drifted to the ground, placing the hangman's core into a satchel pouch. The necromancer, with his arms spread, dropped all of the ancient bones into a flowing black robe, wrapping the macabre find up preciously tight, placing them on his back. Turning to Ton Po, unconscious the monk lay. The necromancer, none other but Velsreik Ysambral, placed a necklace strung with an old idol around Ton Po's neck, as he held the glowing blue core from the carnivorous fiend in shambles, the mutated hangman's ever-living verdant orb, perhaps a key to a secret like the Manisi herb from Chardok he had since long ago sought. Back into the pouch he placed the orb. The Ysambral took the jagged, spiked, alien-like spine, and like a new staff wielded it by his side. He went to reach for Ton Po's bow stick of understanding, inquisitive about the nature of the unique staff. He gripped the spine in one hand, and when reaching out for it, was haunted by the phantasms that plunged him into disarray. Wraiths and visions tore at his spirit in the olden days, fighting against the many foes he laid low in faraway lands where, though vampiric, fought under the glaring sun, a land of deserts and ruined temples, worlds away, the Kalian deserts where he ceaselessly fought and won many battles against vastly uneven odds, his necromantic powers conquering the day. Velsreik Ysambral had been seeking a proper phylactery to extend his immortal being, this core a beginning. A whisper here in the mist of the swamp of no hope levanted the necromancer from the now safe and dreaming monk, disappearing into the shadows where he came from, the Levant carrying him far away. The waterfalls in the distance, a soothing, endless flow beyond the tangle of trees where fate and destiny would await. Ton Po woke up as he heard the waterfalls in his dream, the long chimera of his past ordeal now gone, never a thought in his mind again, only the dream remained. Ton Po looked into a vanishing pond at his side. In recollection he saw reflections of the old disciples and his great master Yu Senkeng. His mind here was at ease, a brilliant, lofty, clear, heavenly, enlightened peace, as if a boon from Quellius gathered at this place. Ton Po stood and gazed into the now nearly evaporated pond, bow stick at his side, that once was surrounded by vivid flourishing jungle plants, overgrown now with different flora, almost more monstrous, abundant in a foreboding way. His simple, sacred home in the distance nearby gone. The pond reflected still, like a deep mirror, the faces of good company in all the greatness of things once statuesque. The great tiger felt a deep yearning in his heart, the way of life once so beautiful, only drifting now in the dwindling pond once so full. Ton Po knew it was the place he trained with other monks so long ago, when he saw the lifeless log, horizontal, where he balanced in the wind, and sparred with Master Yu Senkeng. The Frog-Lock monk master was a very old but virile, strong, Frog-Lockian man. Though frail in appearance, his study and skill in his deep martial arts was unsurpassed. Ton Po began like the tadpole he was here, with only his master to guide him for a time solo in this deep jungle of Kunark. The lands were never the same when the Ixar built their bulwarks, their widespread forts and tribal totems that took over, change that kept the land in chains. The past was all just a dream, even awaking in the midst of two that synced and seemed to be precious visions of a bygone time once so free. Ton Po felt the wind, but the breeze that blew here was a drifting essence of other whims that came. He heard in the trees above, rustling in the foliage, something passing overhead. The Ixar army would find him soon. Ton Po had to continue to escape. He saw nothing in the canopy above. The sounds were as if running on all of its limbs, possibly a predatory creature, or worse. He followed the sound, seeing no visage, no outline, as if camouflaged in the wind. It began to run quicker, as if to get away. Ton Po followed the sound. The plentiful leaves and branches left their dissonant scratches and marks in the surroundings, bouncing off as tones, blends of something dire running through the dense canopy above. Two shades appeared directly behind Ton Po, black shadows that maneuvered in the branches high up. They seemed to want stealth and silence more than the thing in the trees ahead. One figure was quite lithe and tall like Ton Po, obscured by shadows cloaking the mysterious pair up high. Ton Po did not know of the others behind. Seeking out this invisible creature, it leapt from branch to branch, careless to muffle the noise it made. The pair of shadows that followed carefully behind seemed to stalk the creature, whatever was running ahead in time. Ton Po caught up with the noises in the ascending foliage as they stopped. Frozen there a moment, something struck his soul. He saw no outline, an illusionary being there among the twisting branches. He saw closer its eyes that glared down on him in the abyss high up. For a moment a howl like imagined thunder echoed in Ton Po's mind. A crackle of loud lightning kept him entranced in his mortal shell, his built sinew, sacred rind, keeping him stone-stanced. The eyes moved away. The chameleon jaunted, and even more quickly than it had been moving, dashed away, disappearing in sound and shade. One shadow from behind leapt down from the trees above, as Ton Po saw another dreamlike puddle on the ground. The reflection cast a dark monk from behind, carrying a primal Velium brawlstick, a weapon rare like Ton Po's bowstick, but wielded by far more warriors who were found worthy of the energies it contained. Those who had defeated the warders of the Sleeper's Tomb were granted the power of the primal avatar that empowered the weapon's master with vast strength. Ton Po knew of this monk that appeared now as a reflection as he knelt to drink from the seemingly clean water that flowed from a spring nearby. Ton Po knew it was Zanail Raijutsu of the old dynasty of shadows, raiders who traveled Norath, that fought and together defeated many dragons. His power as a fighter was well known, a skillful adversary who fought in great wars of Norath's past in the shadow of Ralo's Sec. Zanail Raijutsu ended up forsaken, joining the Curse in the end, where he fought on, the Curse giving him a second chance to stand against the strongest guild Ascending Dawn, who politically toppled his own. Ton Po swung his bowstick to the side, in a swathing arc behind him, but the reflection was gone. He looked at the water again, a figure, a darkened silhouette, reflected in the still aqueous essence this time. She was as shadowy as a nail, with a black cloth mask wrapped about her head as he. She was twisting the end of her primal Velium brawlstick tightly. Zanail Raijutsu came out of a shadow in front of Ton Po and ran by him, striking with one fluid motion that the old tiger deflected by bowstick overhanded and with force threw Zanail in the direction he dashed towards, where Zanail forward rolled to his feet quickly in the dust. Ton Po stood his ground, his intent to not offend Zanail, this monk of the Curse. Forsaken he roamed, defeated things of the world that were complacent to mortals, forgotten, or allowed to spread the seeds of misfortune. Sects that grew to be strong, dangerous they had become. Zenael learned of shadow magic to deal with the roots of evil in the world. Zenael by shadow, in his old black ancient wyvern-hide gear, from the temple of Vishen, the quick beast Ikatiar the envenomed, jousted once again, appearing at Tompo's side. The two Grand Masters battled each other in a sparring stride, a fight of skill. Bow stick strikes from all directions, blocks, evades, kicks, masterful parries and ripostes. Swift hits that were neutralized by their adaptive techniques in their flowing motions. Their dance in the old training ground brought deep sentimental thoughts, as Zenael Raijitsu and Tompo with a beautiful rhythm fought. Zenael crushed with his primal Velium brawl stick high, and Tompo blocked, the strike being held with both hands, the two Grand Masters seeing eye to eye, their fight in them for both, primal understanding, when their instincts faded back, like a calm retreating tide that subtly became part of the ocean again in their mind. The other shadowy silhouette appeared behind, the forsaken monk Zenael Raijitsu expressing a deep sympathy for Tompo, perhaps knowing the Ixar were upon him, that he had few places to go. He placed his hand outstretched on Tompo's bow stick of understanding, and gripped the ancient wood tightly as they kept their bow sticks locked. Immediately the feminine shadow walked up from behind, Zenael sliding his primal Velium brawl stick marbleized off Tompo's weapon, a very strong wood, as if nearly petrified. The girl's shadow stepped through Zenael as he did the same, his back turned now in the cold environs. The mysterious woman holding a similar brawl stick, Tompo knowing they had come far away from Velius, where hidden scars by the dragons in the snow were memories to him. The two were beneficent banshees, with a message for the old tiger, the vanishing pawn through the years, still by Tompo's feet, effervescing. She held the end of the bow stick out to Tompo, where he solemnly twisted the end, and it began to turn, the straps loosening. She held it with both hands, the spiked bow stick revealing a hollow end. Tompo removed a very old scroll within, weathered by time, entrusted to the sacred monk by the two shadows, emissaries of the soul that sought to help Tompo. The lone Grand Master began to open the parchment slowly. It was a map that had shown the only place of safety for Tompo was old Sibyllus. As dangerous as it was, the rest of the jungle had been by the Ixar surrounded. The barricades and armies, he understood, already had entrenched themselves in the areas the map had been marked around him. He knew the way to the old Sibyllian Empire. Any other place he could go was sealed off. Certain death would await at the hands of the Ixar warriors. The two entrusting, assisting shadows, Zenael Raijitsu and the mysterious girl, were gone, as Tompo lowered and wrapped up the scroll. The mightiest of the Kunzar tribe after Tompo would chase, while fending off the beasts, the great tigers and forlorn wraiths. Stalked by shadows, stepping behind trees they fade as he made his way, a presence of eyes of their master's ominous sight. Emperor Ganek, the slayer of Jalad Dar, who imprisoned Karaphiram, both generals, the dragon who became a wraith and messenger, a vengeful harbinger, who in a stasis and cryonic sleep of his own, still granted passage to adventurers, who sought to defeat the sleeper. Ganek, here in Trakanon's teeth, granted in undeath too the same kind of key unto his eternally mortal enemies of the Ring of Scale, where he floated like his final aerial assault, defeated outside Trakanon's lair. Old Sibyllus, a once grand city of the Ixar Empire, was beyond all the fallen columns that Tompo leaped over, constructed by the eternal Ixar vampire Venril Sathir, many years before Ton Po's fleeting journey now to escape the Ixar swarming. Their numbers among the shadows kept growing, a place sealed by Trachanon after destroying it with his army. He suffered a mortal wound, found a secret within that granted the Dragonon death, Veneral Sathir's hidden soul phylactery. Emperor Gannic, for many centuries later, granted entry to all by defeating the Froglock hunters and foragers to show his distaste for his foe, and give an idol to any slayer willing to fight against the dragon who dared to enter. Ton Po fought hard between the statues of fallen Ixar commanders, a beautiful art form in a flow of flying kicks. When the enemy charged, his bowstick in fluid motions hitting swiftly, finishing the Ixar warriors spread out around the statues that brandished their grim polearms shaped from the bones of colossal beasts. In a display of crowd-controlling rhythm, the monk seized every opportunity to strike with his full power, at times using the Ixar warriors as weapons against them as they growled and hissed in their glower, avoiding any scathe among many surrounded rounds. The fossils of Ixar ancestors shielded the old tiger as he raked combinations of relentless sweeping takedowns. Ton Po bolted forward toward the ruins, dodging ceremonial spears with colorful plumage and tribal essence that flew through the air, barrages thrown, striking the ground, deflected on the stones, and sunken into foliage around him. The Ixar were cunning and great strategists of war, and lied in wait, their traps set for Ton Po, knowing he had nowhere else to go. The monk heard the countless lizardmen as he ran a pathless advance fast in left and right obliques, evading the phaons that pierced through the breeze toward the heart of the palisade. Immense fine nets dropping from the trees high up, the dark night sky splashed with Nerathian stars, great constellations shining their hope, as Ton Po looked above. Caught by a net that Ton Po couldn't evade with a forward roll, he stood but didn't give up. 2 bold Ixar soldiers swooped down as quick as the net had landed. One threw a spear that brave and focused Ton Po evaded, while double shantok blades came swinging. Ton Po, with bowstaff in hand, understood his predicament, reached out of the netting, parried, then riposted, hitting the warrior powerfully as the creature snarled in agony, the bowstaff connecting with stunning impact of 100 blows, rhythms of well-trained and placed swings smashing critically. Though still trapped, Ton Po in few moves unto both Ixar mortally inflicted. In the distance behind, up the stone, lush with verdant life that flourished, the rain began to storm as a cascading torrent, down from the darkness like the rain of blood in the plain of fear on the terrace. The approaching fiends marched to bring the end to Ton Po at all costs, as the tears from heaven flowed down their armor, to allow their soothsayers El Kefra, a grim shamanist chieftain, to bring with them in an ancient relic blessed by Khazak Thul. His soul they sought to perish. The archways and walls Ton Po had to traverse and dodge around after escaping the net that on him fell were less in ruins in Trachanon's teeth at the time. Those still twisting halls, a grand maze, built by the old kings to deflect anything that could retaliate, constructed all along, it would seem, for this one last fated escape into the dark ruins Ton Po would run, strafed as the spears lunged, taking down multiple foes in swift counters, with the bowstick Ton wielded, balancing it on the walls when he had the advantage over their numbers. A song of celestial tranquility echoed throughout the maze, like a beautiful war song, clear and pristine, strong mountains pure as water from snow to snow, while the fight pressed on, his fists like liquid sighing for the fallen, tiger claws crushing the enemy with a speed unmatched by any other. The scale of this hunt-down was becoming known to the most revered Kabbalist generals, and the green mist shadow knights, the dark death riders, who in their macabre power freed their Ixar brothers enslaved by the evil Shizar. Tonpo brought the fight into the depths of the jungle, to the former heart of the Sibylician Empire, where the Ixar, though conquered and banished from this land, still came in vast array from Kabylis, as forsaken exiles to fight over it. The last light of the moon and stars shined in on this dark night, in Tonpo's strife, fading in the shadows behind, the glow of the torches from the fallen lizardmen assailants, burning away their last life. Down into the broad tunneled halls marked by sigil and war, carved into stone the Ixar warriors of long ago. The entrance to the ruins of old Sibyllus was before him, a dark bubble, tangible yet of the void, an otherworldly magical barrier, glowing, an enthralling luminance pulsing, appearing as red lava swirled in the abyss of black waves slowly flowing, surrounding this orb, its radius placed into the ground. The gateway to the abyss that locked the dungeon away from all explorers. Any plunge into the once lionized and exalted Exar capital, where once marched forth many Khanzar in their darkened glory and final hour, was a point of no return for any mortal. Though Tonpo strided into myriad legion fights victorious, this was the battle of his life, the one he would be known for best, perhaps a true test of his strength. The monk calmly rested in serene balance, undaunted by his task, illusions fading, everything falling into place. His soul was silently forlorn, weeping a tear within for his one true love and family now gone. He knew it was destiny to fight Trakenon. Poignant rhythms of his heart inspired him, like the echoes of tranquility from the epic fists he was granted by the immortals. The pursuing Ixar were incoming. It would be an endless fight, like the many years of conflict, seeking in eternity peace for a moment. The monk would be overwhelmed eventually, forced to fight their entire army, if he fought here in this dismal, murk-sodden, dead-end chamber. The true fight was within, not with the Ixar. Tonpo reached out to the mysterious sunken orb with bow stick held in his phalanges, and grasped an idol in his powerful hand around his neck, given to him by the intrepid, enigmatic necromancer in the Swamp of No Hope, one that he had worn for many years in fights across these war-torn lands defending his home, returned by the mystical Ysambrel alone. With his solemn resolve, the gateway began to twist and warp, a touchstone of fortitude and resolution. Wishes flashed back in his mind to indelible, precious memory of waterfalls envisioned, of his life a flooding tide rushing toward the horizon, the last glimpse of sunlight, his soul rivers flowing into this critical moment. The old monk with perceptive clarity, knowing his final quest he now had been living, this sacrificial fight to retaliate against the worst of evil things, ways taught now fading, the quintessential training he guided his disciples with, his only legacy, every step a momentous meditation, decisive and tranquil. While the terror around him began to shake, Tonpo's visage cloaked to shadows, his body phasing into the darkness of the orb's depths. The Ixar found the monk they thought they had trapped, flanking their chieftain shamaness El Kefra. They desperately threw their spiked chakram, spears and glaives flying at the monk's disappearing form. As the ground quaked, the walls inscribed with Ixar glyphs fractured, one tumbling column collapsing ominously that held the chamber's support, an intricate totem of history devoted to the bygone realm of old, and cryptic hieroglyphs nearly crushed Tonpo as he steadfastly held the aged idol, the Ixar weapons not to seek the blood their wielders sought to cull in their salvo. As Ton Po dematerialized into the orb's dark barrier, realizing the entire structure was falling, the chieftain hissed a curse, the soul well in her hand empty, a mere primordial antique kept with her out of malevolent enmity, hunting for Ton Po especially. Cyclopean rocks fell, crushing and annihilating many of the now lost and doomed Ixar battalion. The chieftain Shamaness El Kefra dismally removed her macabre headdress of feathers, fangs, and skulls, dropping her grim predatory crown to the ground, and with a lamentation penetrated with her glaive under the scale armor of her most loyal warriors, finishing them quickly, wanting to absorb their power in the evil, faceless, aged clay deity. A pained soul, face to face, had come to visit the temporal dream Ton Po had gone beyond now, its ghostly form drifting past all the boulders, debris, and remains that had befallen the hundreds of Ixar warrior corpses. The chieftain Shamaness's foreboding deathly crown she wore where she dropped it, in a place where no rocks had fallen, this headdress the only thing that knew fate was the hunter better than she who once wore it. This pained soul absorbed into the red and black ethereal orb, touching the fringes of physical and spirit, a chimera it became for touching the gateway. The pained soul was a Sebelite ancestor killed immoral and unjustly, a vengeful ghost that haunted the ruins, a déjà vu in this vision, repeating itself again in the chieftain's corrupt volition at her end. It bared the marks and stigma of all Ixar in their castes, of imagined hierarchies, an amalgamation of unforgivable sin among them, an exiled soul that contained all the pain of every element that their living souls had done wrong, because of its own vessel of great sorrow. It took a momentary mercy upon Ton Po. It could only appear in the vision of his dream, but it was a peaceful soul as he, once free and pristine, whispering the lost dreams of the Obulus. Haunted by a fiery death that fell from the sky, rock and fire burned their lands, death and destruction splintered this Ixar tribe, all their peoples, all their works gone. The pained soul fathomed Ton Po's righteous final fight to end the evil of the dragon that usurped Sibyllus, with poison mists and wisps of venom, a dark empathy, and a sympathy, with it a message, as it from the monk's ephemeral dream vanished. Emerging from intangible shadow, moving into the hollow of the bastion of the nefarious dragon, Ton Po opened his eyes, materialized, and entered the zone, his memory occluded by a focus and final reason. Rising up to his feet, he stood above the ramp and arches where within lay the great empire where the Khanzar once reigned, and thought to be unstoppable with their leader, Emperor Chodl, now invaded by the frog-lock Krupp knights, guarding valiantly in their rubble, prepared to hold on to the vestiges of their glorious hovel. Ton Po went down through the ruined yet still grand halls, striding by torches lit by fires burning long, where as he passed a woven creature invisibly shadowed the flames as he went on. The monk feigned his death several times to pass the croaking guards, their seemingly docile ways hiding their combative and territorial nature to protect their lily pad amongst the fronds, where they mimicked the duties and positions of the Ixar that once lived in this dark home. The ruins became a cavernous tunnel as he went on, opening into the expanse beyond into a subterranean grotto, where below lurked the dwelling of the strongest protectors, some in undeath, that forgotten Ixar and froglock casters necromantically made as eternal pawns. Ton Po had never seen the inside of this sealed, well-guarded place. He had only heard myths and stories, and though the Ixar troopers were out of the way, his hand forced to meet his fate, He was already going to face Trachanon when they came. There was no return out of old Sibyllis now. In the ruins Ton Po was vehement, silent and impassioned, overcome by his destined way, the quest that his life's journey led. He had nothing earthly left. The frogmen and their natural environs patrolled the grounds above the swampy underground river, where from an old map that Ton Po had once seen in his youth knew that they led where the dragon lurked. He dived into the deep water below from a stone bridge where it flowed under a wall, remembered the magic fish scales in a pouch into his strap sewn, and held his enduring breath. The current took him while swimming under water with scissor kicks to a blocked route with grating above. He wedged his bow stick in the moss, and with leverage submerged forced the obstacle up. The chamber he came up into was chilled and dark. Ton Po could hear the echoes of Froglock croaking past the gated door. The monk, realizing it was a jail, reached out with his bow stick through the bars, and with both sinew-built arms forced a lever and extricated himself. The guards the Froglock kept in this jail were sleeping and few roamers, so Ton Po was able to sneak past their numbers. In the halls of the sleeping Froglocks the ribbiting could be heard from all directions in their sanctuary, their croaking in sleep as if snoring in their dreams so far deep in the ruins buried. As Ton Po sneaked around their instinctual lily pads, the places the Froglock, even though through evolution outgrew, could walk like the lizard men once did among the ruins. The Froglocks, Zol, Dar, Krupp, and Illis, slept still. The monk came to a wooden locked door, out of place for these ruins, he thought. The knob unordinary at the end of this hall, the key unfound. One of the Froglock guards most likely had a skeleton one. Ton Po shook the knob. It clicked sharp tones in many places, but it was a time of hibernation among the sleeping frogs, no matter how loud the door was. Ton Po stood and listened on the other side. As he twisted the knob, it locked back in reverse several times. He shook the whole door and found a crack in the wood, where he saw an old Froglock twisting the lock to open it behind. The old creaking wooden door came open. The Froglock looked at Ton Po, a friendly demeanor among so many beasts and beings out to defeat him, thoughtlessly slaying soul, two of goodness here in wavering time. The old Froglock's stature unrecognizable, though his gestures were meaningful. The Froglock was silent. Ton Po knelt with bow stick beneath his knees and ankles, and warmed the Froglock's cold webbed hands, slime-covered and dirty. For much time the worn Froglock dwelt in this place. Ton Po didn't know who the forsaken Froglock was in rags found. The Froglock's somber hand slipped off his, and the elder Froglock made an endearing sound. With Ton Po knelt here, the Froglock held Ton Po's hand very solemn and strong, as if prayerful, a touch that meant so much here in the darkness. Stepping back with a jump, the Froglock, as if by wind, shut the door. Ton Po raised himself quickly, and tried to reopen the door. With one hand on the lock and the other on the wood, it was silent beyond the partition, keeping Ton Po from seeing the ill-fated frog again. He struggled in dire silence to see his friend. The more he shook, the less he would find. Like water, the Froglock dear to him slipped through Ton Po's hands. A somber silence, poignant here in the darkened depths of old Sibyllis. He knew that which mattered most he would never see again. It was his old master, Yusenkeng. Ton Po heard a howling through the jails tunneling below the jungle above, the labyrinth resounding echoes that went far for how loud it was. He listened to both the door and the distant howl, some guardian that stalked the night like a ghoul, invisible. It was silent in the area past the door. Ton Po and silent him, penitent, took his bow stick and moved on. The fungal growths in the dungeon halls began to increase in size as Ton Po stepped to not touch. Lichen and mushrooms grown like mutations unseen by any adventurer before covered the deep cave, which forked many ways into a twisting rocky maze. Ton Po took the far right path past toadstools his bow stick happened to tap. Looking back, he saw a wet chamber in the twisting cavern with mutant fungus within he sensed must be asleep. Rising from a patch of fungus with strange strident sounds from behind, the toadstool creeped up as high as his ankle to Ton Po's feet. Harmless, almost humored by the friendly bantam bane, this magically animated redcap would be a mushroom hunter's dream. Spores fell from stalactites and filled the damp cavern. Sensing the danger of the situation, Ton Po feigned his death near the stalagmites, in the midst of the unique, wistful cavern. The sleeping myconids woke from their slumber. Reavers and adepts guarded the one among them atop an old platform. These mutant mushrooms, who became strong after many millennia of mold, developed a sentience under the myconid spore king who controlled. The fungus men stood, searching in the darkness lit by the essence of wisps and strange plants glowing bioluminescence for any food, though the damp sod within was the ground from which they grew. Regenerative abilities they by nature of their being knew. Ton Po's bow stick lay away from him on the mossy green. The myconid spore king had the keenest sense for its surroundings, though in its evolution blind in the dark, for it was as if it could be anywhere in its maze at the same time. The leader of the myconids wandered to the great weapon, whereby the feigned monk it lie, reavers silent, adepts still sleeping, immortal to what was called life. Reaching out with its tendrils, it could not see Ton Po at its side, hidden behind the mossy rocks. He was in a sleep of his own. To feign death in this way meant to remain in his body, yet seen as a corpse. Through spirit and psyche, maintaining control over his mortal core, a torpor, breaths slowed with his heart, possessing a mastery over the elements that bound him to the physical plane, chakras balanced, in his soul calm within. An incidental time of rest, this moment, he found among the myconids sleeping here, where for many centuries they wait. Ton Po himself waited patiently for the myconid spore king to move from where it stood. As it looked around blindly in the cavern, its senses heightened, attuned to the dark. Ton Po's death feign was seemingly enough to keep the mutant fungal growth, the king of them all, away from having his loyal reavers do their work. For something this slow, with so long down here to regenerate and evolve, Ton Po knew he was dealing with myconids that were very strong. With a timely resolve, Ton Po, with bow stick in hand, again flipped off his back to his feet, and ran outside the cavernous damp dead end, as the reavers and the king instantly were upon Ton Po, rushing swiftly at him to flay and rend. Ton Po dodged their wails, taking care to jump over the little toadstool that sprouted by his feet. Falling to the side deeper into the dungeon dark, he feigned his death again. The myconid spore king's guards, on their old feet, created by the yearning in the darkness, bounced away, their magic sentience seeking amongst the groves in this deep cavernous dungeon to roam for sustenance. Perhaps the frog-lock sorcery here brought them into their ever-living beings. Ton Po on the ground slowed all his bodily functions down, cold as the environs these myconids dwelled. The reavers disappeared behind, vanished into the background of the spore king's tall form. Only it and Ton Po were here now. Ton Po rolled into the tunneling caves that twisted throughout, defeating the king he thought could cause alarm. As it marched back to its spore-ridden throne, He threw a rock, ricocheting on the walls, the Spore King confused where what it once sensed was gone. Tonpo rolled and fleeting down a tunnel stood. The Spore King sensed the monk, out of sight of his reavers, he charged towards. Tonpo, ready to defend, struck the Spore King low with a wide swath, the husk of its being eroded, but naturally toughened versus its long-awaited onslaught. Tonpo was hit by the king, raised up by a back roll, and in one motion hit strong the leader of the Myconids. It buckled backward under the force of his blow. The Spore King frenzied and hit every direction it detected Tonpo's bow stick was coming from, with its wretched hands that were like hollow stems, hammers crushing high and low that swung. Tonpo took advantage of his full speed, the cloak by his side, a red flare in the dark it flied, his rare Rakusha cloak, one of a kind, expediting his blocks, hits, counters, and strides. Tonpo remembered his slow stone amber his wife had given him, being hit by the Myconid Spore King now from many directions, Tonpo weakening the fungus man through all the myriad flurries he tried to land. With each, dandelion will-o-wisps danced away in the dark from its reddened, oversized mushroom head. Tonpo held strong his amber stone, revealing it to the Mushroom King. A wave of lethargy and slow it now faced, diminished its flurry of hits, paced in the spores around it, where it sluggishly winced and struggled to hasten its speed, hitting very slowly. Tonpo, who let loose his great fury of his most damaging strikes, punched the Myconid King several times. The king too slow to react, Tonpo rushed around the Mushroom Man. His reavers would have fought to the end if not split by feigned death. For Tonpo this would be the most fun fight he had known, ironically the only hits he had taken since he had to run. He took his time to defeat the king, hitting while it could barely move. It was finished upright. Tonpo by force and mercy struck very hard with his fists that sang through the tunnels, echoing a celestial tranquility with strong palm and knuckle technique, the master of his epic, showing very clearly the reasons why Tonpo never saw defeat. Tonpo raised his bow stick to level the mutant leader to the ground, smacking it from wall to wall, its enormous fungal form always hidden here, surrounded by the wet geodes that broke through its innate armor now. The pulp beneath the toughened flesh was like the gyrating ooze that seeped along the ground in the crypt of Dalnir, where the Cly overseer had ruled below. The crescent gear in that dungeon from the Sarnak many monks near and far searched for and found. The Spore King's limbs were wailing to still slowly strike against Tonpo, but his quickness and rhythm was tearing the fungal monstrosity apart. The Myconid Spore King, with only the sound of its vain swings through the still, cold air, smothered with kicks and swift hits, could not sustain the Grandmaster's assault. The Fungus King, falling down as Tonpo leapt aside, its mushroom head face first toppled to the ground. Tonpo felt the regenerative surface and essence of the fallen foe. Perhaps it would rise again, but meant nothing to Tonpo, for he had nowhere to go. It would not come back this way, the only way in. Destined, fated to fight Trachanon, he took the surface from the layers of the Spore King, that took the least damage in its husk, with regards to their positions, and wore it like an ethereal guard. His minor wounds healed quicker, his vitality becoming whole and strong in the dark tunnels, granted a boon of fungal regrowth. Tonpo turned away from the Spore King, onward to the last words he'd ever wrote. Into the system of tunnels that led to the dragon's lair he would go, a path of 3 trails forked in the dark, his last road. He remembered from long ago his master Yusenkeng told him to take the middle road, but sweep the kick low on their training log at Tonpo, So with little light but the fireflies he kept in a drachnid silken pouch, journeyed the southern tunnel to its end and final door, evading the myriad myconids by stealth and sneak, to a gateway into the vast cavern beyond, where the enemy lie in wait. Entering a chamber with archways and a firepot, Ton Po saw on the far wall. From afar, Sebolite golems gazed back through their empty eye sockets, their hulking bodies created from stone and mud, as if built into the ground, solidified where calmly they solemnly stood, frozen there, as if awaiting reanimation by whatever created their powerful structures. Ton Po knew they would be an impenetrable defense should these golems awake. The brave monk walked on the edge, carefully stepping into the quiet place, past the first two golems that, though lifeless, seemed as if once alive, frozen by some wizard's invisible chains that kept them asleep, making few motions but long, careful steps past, now behind them but ahead were the rest. Larger and more foreboding than the entry golems, these staunch defenders stood double Ton Po's size. The door that opened ahead, while Ton Po stood still, started to close. The ground around him began to rise. Interlocking stones fell into place, and the lifeless golems ahead rose up off their knees, their long arms standing them tall on their feet. To nothing physical these golems could be weak. Ton Po saw into their chests inlaid a dull, deep gem, that by the firepot's blazing light glistened a brilliant shining green. Leverage into their stone hearts, like over high terrain, vaulting over the soul sippers in the emerald jungle in the sun of days past. Though the jungles were always dark, the emerald mist obscuring the path like the gems. Now, along with Ton Po's precious village he saw, glimpsing into the stones, once his long-time home, only forever within his soul, and the ones left behind, drifting in the remains now as ghosts. The village a haunted hamlet, with vengeful spirits, yet friendly with honorable merit, their eidolons sadly searching why their dear beings had been routed. The golems were activated by inescapable movement in the cavernous room, whose structure and walls were fading to that of a temple built, from cave to ruins, with elegantly placed stones. The Grand Master leaped forward, and immediately, with great leverage by his bow-stick of understanding, dislodged the green gem from its socket. The golem not able to move, frozen now forever, like a sacred secret locket, a memory and a vision of Ton Po's wife's necklace, given in a fading time of precious moments, something treasured, but truly only protecting the fiend at the deepest of the dungeon. The other golem moved slowly at Ton Po. Its hits he knew compared to the Fungus King would be devastational, so he forward rolled between the unyielding behemoth's legs, climbing up its back. The stone, muddy-like texture of the golem beast, where once a brave adventurer may have left his tracks. Over the golem's right shoulder, the jewel now with Ton Po's bow-stick between, Ton Po was vying for a place to unattach the life-giving inlaid gem. The golem threw Ton Po from the giant's shoulder, the scenery like a piggyback ride that Ton Po remembered his father had done, running through the endless, eternal jungles with him when he was very young. The golem in its singular goal swung hard with both arms, approaching zombie-like at Ton Po. It could go on forever, the monk felt, as he dodged in his most stylish, evasive arrays. The archways crushed by the gigant's arms. One hit could mean death's fall. The bridged archway Ton Po led the golem following, upstairs and around. A ghostly shadow ran up as Ton Po did the other staircase behind. Ton Po saw the shade stand there and bow his head. It was the ghost from the Trakanon's teeth graves. Ton Po, with memory reminiscent within, in reflex moved over the golem, and struck with his bowstick high up, on its helmet-like head with no neck. Solid it was. The golem, different from the others. Perhaps it was the first experimental golem created named Brog. The golem reached up to grab and swipe at Tom Poe with one massive mudite hand, and the other hit strong the wall, and like a weak column, the archway onto the golem came crashing down in its senseless rampaging romp. As the stones fell, the ghost vanished from the stairs it walked upon. Tom Poe landed atop the fallen golem's behemothig body below, and with great force removed from the center of its upper chest its master's jewel. The golem's magic severed from the deep green gem, its vibrations pulsing, like an eternal heart's unfathomable beating within. Tom Poe held the stone. Vague visions of where it was found drifted in the unknown. One-of-a-kind jewels cut masterfully, imbued with magic by wizardry and alchemy. He remembered the flame, moving close to grand memories in the fire-pot, the essence burning bright. This stone door was the last hindrance this deep in the dungeon of old Sibyllus. Tom Poe's soul still fiery, bold inside. The green hue of the invaluable stone of the golem's fate reminded him of the Fulgian stone of Innerrook, that by a wizard's magic could send souls to the ethereal plane of hate. Tom Poe gazed into the flames, recollecting a deep memory, as he was for a long moment standing there, his eyes pulled into its depths, his soul remembering long ago, Tom Poe in a woo-like trance, a dreamlike state. Tom Poe had a flashback, where once he had adventured many decades ago into an altar plane, through a portal opened by a wizard who spoke of tomes and cryptic poem upon visit to the jungle, about cursed, dishonored immortals, where Tom Poe fought the mummified remains of ancient, once noble monks, the Kirai Kui, relentless undead fighters reanimated by Innerrook. Tom Poe quelled their trapped souls there to face his test, what among the rest in his raid, Grand Master Tal, who battled Tom Poe on the dark streets of the Plane of Hate. The echoes of the undead wailed in that dangerous place while in combat, as Grand Master Tal struck at Tom Poe in haste. Dashing around to strafe the relentless beast, Tom Poe stunned Grand Master Tal with a swooping eagle strike to his bandaged face. The two monks in combat were in stalemate, Grand Master Tal taking much damage, though his coveted Rakusha cloak granted his hits quick haste. The sheer number of undead that were the denizens of the ancient Gothic structures, hiding evils around every corner, shrilled blood-chilling screams, cries, and tones ricocheting off the etched stone walls within. Bats, demonic creatures, and beasts carved into the sunken reliefs. An endless somber melody echoed in twisted directions heard through the whole zone in that tenebrous place. Tom Poe fought on with Grand Master Tal, the monk and undeath, possessing techniques combined that made for an interesting fight. Fist wrappings tattered, back in the darkness, then close again. Tom Poe had to sense where every move he made came from in their shadowy space. With great countering speed, Tom Poe pummeled Grand Master Tal with a disciplined 100 fists he learned intrinsically from foes driven to fight as this enraged. The once noble undead monk, falling to swings imbued, in a wide arc from the black abyss above, Tom Poe's bowstick of understanding, a pendulum smashing Grand Master Tal disgraced, he fell to the ground. Tom Poe heard a dissonant dirge, yet chained harmony, mellifluously resonating somber, poignant song, a perpetual phantasmic sonata yearning through the atramentous halls, vibrating through the wandering bones and possessed souls haunted that cowered in scorn, playing on the grand organ, the forsaken vampire, the maestro of rancor. The multitude of organ pipes echoed eternal their writer's poem, an endless composition arranged in the dark, scorned banshees searching ethereal black hearts, their tones savored by the vampires that immortally basked in the blood of the sons of Tunare. Inaruk was upon his dark throne, gazing into the passions of mortal souls. With rapturous precision he tore at their existence, and severed the fabric of their being. Tanpo in his assault against the Kirai Kui took down many of their count, proclaiming too soon in their defeated moments, "My form was weak, your style was excellent, I hate you." Tanpo found among them a significant relic in the wrappings of the exonerated undead monks, ensorcelled remains on the unholy ground, free and no longer by illusions ruled. Tanpo glimpsed into his own mortality among the once cursed monks here, their corpses no longer trapped and fooled, as he held tightly the rare relic of the past, a shuriken of the tranquil, in the right hands and will, a deadly weapon against great evil. Its shine reflected like upon the pond Tanpo once practiced by in his youth, where in the forest he learned from and shadow sparred with. Tanpo, thinking once their mortal forms strived as he to train, his soul well a sombre rain, a bucket dropped into the depths, no matter how deep, always brings to the surface a treasure within, inspired in the touching moment at the poignant height of sadness or pain. To live his days the best he could attain, scars mere flesh, only attached to psyche by fane. Their fettered souls liberated now, among the corpses Tanpo stood, that imparted a hastening to leave, their souls twisted karma with no time to stay. Tanpo unraveled Grand Master R. Tal's wrappings, taking the Rakusha cloak, the sinister garb, unlike any creation he had ever seen, an unusual odd mystique, a vibrance of supernatural energy empowering him with a permanent visceral haste. Wearing it around his sash low, it would whirl in the wind behind him now, wherever he would go. Looking around at the structures, hearing the organ being played eternal, it would be the last time he saw the plane of hate. As he stood in the darkness, his worn and frayed fist wrappings, grasping the shuriken, a silent mantra he prayed. He knew the Fulgian soulstone of Inaruk was the only way to arrive. The mysterious erudite wizard, who had wrote great tomes of this domain, aptly named Scorn Skullfire, who had come out of the darkness to search the corpses for what he divined was there, an amulet of necropotence he sought, but realized as he looked into the dark, it could only be in the plane of fear, in Kazakh Thul's clay hands, ceremoniously worn as the colossal god of fear thundered across the jungle plains with his skeletal pets. A blood-red sky above the canopy overhead, pyramids where his minions of terror, fright, and dread oversaw the horrors within, winged gorgons with wicked snakes for hair flying, their gaze scaring skin into stone. The Dracolich, guardian to Kazakh Thul, a construct of bones that roamed, formed from the fallen foes who dared to enter the terrifying planar zone. Amygdalan knights, in their armored, primordial, gargantuan, oceanic bodies, cephalopotic faces gazing into the flames, their evil harm-touching embraces, and knowledge of invoking the abyss, beyond walls of fire burning into the wizard's vision, his eyes now like a living inferno, fiery ablaze in the darkness, now staring into Tanpo's war-torn yet halcyonic soul, solemnly standing in his robes with the staff of the Four. He began casting a portal for the great tiger, saying, "Its poison burns more than any flame, yet what is sealed is opened this way. Beware, Grand Master, the dragon's wrath lies beyond the gate, destined, your chasm of chance, O venomous fate." Low notes and engaging melody from the maestro of Rancor's distant organ chamber then played, bidding farewell in the forsaken vampire's own way. A thunder surrounding Ton Po opened a portal to the lost temple of Cossack Thule. Ton Po vanished into the darkness as he had there appeared, the memory gone, his remarkable flashback like a dream. The firepot that burned eternal blocked the last door Ton Po would go through, the key. He woke from his glorious vision of when he was young, and placed the deep green gem into the flames, while the stone door rose up out of the way. Ton Po snuck by the sleeping Krupp knights, their sleep like the rivers of Trakanon's teeth, the peaceful croaking moving others to their own dreams of sleep inside, their fancy armor and weaponry without a use here in Ton Po's time. The chasm opened up as his road narrowed. Many more of the behemoth golems here stood, the ceiling very high overhead. A vast chasm Ton Po had entered, his test to not wake the sleeping Sibylician juggernauts, which stood several times higher than the other defeated golems that Ton Po had to fight. These were sunken into the walls standing high. The monk very quickly moved silent through the mist that started to gather as he moved forward. These golems were all frozen solid guardians, and Ton Po came to the vast rocky chasm, where water flowed below, and where high up Trakanon resided. Though its roars were few, a mostly quiet dragon, for it did not breathe fire. It was enough to make the mightiest warrior move his gauntlets to his helmet, to be sure he was still watching through his visor. Ton Po heard the sounds of a varied pitch of croaking that resounded, different from the other froglocks, as if ubiquitous in the vast expanse of the deepest part of old Sibyllis, the last steps toward the powerful dragon. As the monk cautiously stepped with stealth, climbing the rocks on the edges of the path leading upward to the far-reaching intense roars and domain of Trakanon. In the green mists that pervaded the whole dead-end chamber, the croaks became longer and louder, echoing through the vast and high chasm, as if coming from all directions. The croaking turned into dread howls. Ton Po felt a chill, his senses perceiving something hidden in the baleful fog. A presence stood that bellowed like an alpha wolf in its cavernous territory, starved and exiled, inciting a battle. At the end of that fated cavern, Trakanon eclipsed the howls by roars, the being jumping around unseen, its form blurred and invisible, a phantasmus that had stalked Ton Po as he made his way onward, since he had run through the swamp, the howls from the jail, and its shadow upon torches as he entered the dungeon. Blades slashed through the mist, as if wielded by a ghost, an animation floating through the air, attacking Ton Po, the monk's aim set to adamant defense. Ton Po turned to the werewolf that phased invisibly out of sight when struck, cloaking its shape, the dire beast's physique like a sinister hound howling, wreathing around Ton Po in guile, like a snake's coil, while at him blades flew toward, an invisible guardian wielding swords that persistently dived through the mist, slashing when close, mysteriously skilled, having a will of its own. The animation that by the werewolf Ton Po saw was controlled. Even when struck between the pair of sharp blades, countering as the monk dodged, the entity had no substance at all, just cross-cutting blades as if summoned, a phantom swordsman that gracefully cut through the haze. The sword seemed to counter when its werewolven master was vulnerable. Ton Po quickly hit the dervish in the wind that swooped at him, the blades spinning, clashing against the cavern wall, and attacked the dire creature as it growled, revealing its full, fierce, beastly visage. Its seemingly innate invisibility dropped, its eyes glared cold. The werewolf hauntingly howled from its razor-sharp, fang-filled maw, as Tanpo swiftly bludgeoned the werewolf again hard. It swiped from the ground, where it stood at the front of Tanpo on all fours on its paws. A primal instinct twisted by the werewolf's bloodlust slashed out to ravage Tanpo, with its black-haired hands that were giant claws, where Tanpo noticed shackles attached to chains, covered by its fur, its left wrist and right leg bound. The cursed beast barked up the path, preparing to charge yet again, one of many rounds. Tanpo maintained the sharpest concentration against this elusive enemy, keeping an eye on the werewolf. The blades dashed from the corner of his sight, slashing by him on the bridge below as he dodged, nearly severing an extremity. At a distance, the werewolf howled, casting a spell. Tanpo heard the barking of Taschen, the wolf of the deep, a cursed sorcerer who in fate was bitten by an old soul in his youth. The mark is not always bad when uninvoked. If it finds you, the task could be quite strong, depending on the one to you has come that renders itself useful to one's constellation. The path here it needed to know. It tends to its young, lets one's spirit temper and grow strong, full, vast vessel, available infinite times more. Bitten with the curse, not knowing him directly, because the monster was how Taschen worked, unfathomed. In the distance, the barking in Tanpo's hearing created lower magic resistance. Tanpo knew this final guardian of the dragon would fight with a fierce, unyielding persistence. Raw combat to the death, where the full extent of their abilities took over their instincts. The elusive werewolf, illusory in the distance, now behind up the sloping path, cast another spell. Roots and tendril grew from around Tanpo's legs, his feet rooted in place, as the Taschen barked within. The swords the werewolf controlled floated slowly back into the air in front of him, as the creature became invisible again. Tanpo quickly took from a pouch one stone, a crystallized pumice, that in his hand began to glow, fissuring at its core, the roots from his feet falling away, the grasping tendrils being dispelled. The mist in the cavern had grown, the howls from the werewolf had stopped, the wicked dragon's roars from the chasm above had ended. A wind in the cavern began to blow. Mists revealed eyes in the fog. Tanpo looked down and remembered his quest to quell the Kirai-Kui so long ago, their once noble souls at rest now. The ancient relic acquired that Tanpo since then always kept at his side. With his back to the werewolf ready to charge, knowing even if he looked, the werewolf was only now to him an illusionary spirit form, a ghostly mirage. Tanpo grappled with the beast after a charge, swiped with its massive claws. The gash on his chest slowly bled to his sash and rakusha cloak. The red flowed, camouflaged on the essence of the unworldly crimson cloth. The artifacts, spikes, and tines exquisite, the ancient ninja star now covered in blood. Tanpo reached down, taking the shuriken of the tranquil out of his cloak, time as if slowing down, his vital fluids dripping from the ninja star kept for so long. He felt the wind flow beside, the werewolf silently charging in stealth to bring down the monk. As the swords magically in the wind rose, he knew they would no longer slash, but its joust prepared to lance his soul. Turning around with adamant will, Tanpo with the shuriken of the tranquil high up balanced in his strong right arm, poised to throw, his left hand to the ground, the animation of swords like a phantom behind him thrusting full force. The tall tiger crouched, and the sinister eyes came at him through the fog. In a fluid motion, with exacting accuracy, Tanpo lowered his arm, the star sent from his hand spinning into the wind, with an aura of celestial tranquility. The shuriken of the tranquil flew, and struck the charging creature, hitting the lichen between its eyes, sinking the sharp, piercing tine deeply into the evil werewolf's mind. Tonpo instantly fell forward and lay flat on the ground, the swords bolting through the air behind, lancing overhead past his victorious soul, launching still without its master's control, dual blades impaling straight into its chest with a force that gored past the black fur of its back, plunging into the werewolf's heart. The dire beast made no sound, the werewolf glaring at Tonpo as the tiger stood up. Tonpo walked to the collapsed creature on the ground, his bow stick in his hand crossing his side, his body very limber and lithe. The werewolf he knew to be an illusion now, twisting and withered, became the froglock it was, the enchanter Tolapumj. Tonpo stood silent there, looking up the twisting pathway carved into the high wall, the wind in the chasm a cool breeze. The memory of his grand past floated there in time, the last reflection of memories he would have in his dignified life, the blood on his chest already sealing the gash where the werewolf inflicted his only wound through all this strife. Tonpo's soul looked beyond, wayward, flickering in the mist, his spirit walking past the beast, Tonpo's bow under his arm, tendons of sinew that guided the powerful weapon into forts far flung throughout the lands of Kunark, and directing his disciples by rivers and temples atop majestic mountains, who in their lives were lost, guiding them with the best mentoring influence, emboldening them for their hard trials to come. Tonpo tread up the narrow pathway climbing up the cliffside, leading to the dread lair, the area where Trakanon resided, the source of the dire roars that echoed cacophonously throughout the surrounding caverns. The monk sneaked silently up the crag, pebbles falling into the placid water below, ripples that spread out encircling centrifugal echoes eternal, perpetuating the continuation of posterity, waves encompassing every moment carried on, from inception of the plunge, immersion into water, the stones falling, the countless bubbles effervescing to the surface, where stars were created, coming from the random unknown out of goodness, like angels who were beings that never came to earth. Together, though apart, a variety of distance and space, the fabric of the being requiring a distant luminosity to shine on a faraway place, unreachable, though they once existed, the bubbles disappearing like everything does, the stones descending where planets and galaxies were made, like the creation of the universe. Tonpo looked up into the cavern with a sorrow, into the mist floating. Of all the soul's memories he was, his grand lineage, every soul, every breath of every hour of every one he ever learned from or knew, that brought him to this moment, a mercy by him, taken upon every soul that wished to roam freely, unbound by the evils that plague man's journey. The expansive stone temple, with poignant cathedral ceilings, appeared before him, where stalactites in positions hanged above. His soul in its final mortal minutes, immortal the old monk would be forever on. The mist lingering here, but blown away by the dragon's titanic lungs, the fog fading together, reformed and rejuvenated like aqua-green shadows, bellows of roaring that struck even in him a sullen tone, sounds that drifted in time, spirits hearing the sonar that bats hanging overhead knew intrinsically as callous banter, deafening the cruel fortitude, sinisterism severed by obstreperous sound flowing still, unaffected yet enveloped. The bats listened, and the gods heard the audible songs of gloom-trodden hearts, echoes created in the mist reverberating into eternity unto that soul's word, sounds made by the living, attracting like spirits, even unseen specters, some altruistic, benevolent beings. The austere gaze into the heights above became a living poem in Tonpo's soul, his back to the smooth yet jagged rock wall, like a charred volcanic ridge, his spirit lit with the great fierce fire that once breathed past the precipice. Sidestepping left into the mist beyond, the pathway wrapped in the mist up and along the high cavern, while the leviathan above roared over the chasm. Stalagmites below were positioned to impale, at crucially concentrative instances over the fateful trail, as if ancient soul geodes gathered there threatening, souls that were banished to their forms, or shaped by forming in places by demons. The adamant monk saw far down while in the most perilous latitudes. The stalagmites, over eons, developed to test this very determined moment. A destined, lone, narrow route, in the mist atop steep rock, high up over deathly spaces of abyss, Tan Po stepped cautiously, calmly toward the dread lair. Strafing around the wall, he leapt up over a ravine that led to spikes far down. No mistakes could be made here. His focus was comprehensive. There was no nature alive like vines the monk could hold, but singed earthen physique, twisting steeply, ramping every step closer to the maleficent being. As Tan Po ascended to his full height, after the daring jump he made, the old tiger's bow stick under his arm, displacing the mist where he landed, there was an odd premonition in the rising wind that blew harder than any howling here before. Tan Po saw the ghosts of the eldest and greatest Ixar warriors, the last of the Sibylician Empire, mounting a last charge up the twisting path into the depths of the lair. They were like whirlwinds, reptilian Chindi, a royal army set on taking back their home. They rushed in with great weapons of old, their armor protecting nothing but bones that lay in the wind, that strangely whirled around where Tan Po stood. Their scattered bones along the chasm path displayed the unrest of diligent warriors who fought their last here. Tan Po's own mortality on the brink, in this forsaken hymn, the faint sounds of the willful soldiers, their staunch fortitude, their last breaths they took passed by him, their gazes marching up the high chasm behind, eyes fearless, their final heartbeats before their sheath of life would escape, their powerful souls in their last grand march against the wicked Trachanon would replay in the fog eternally here. The battle that took place here once was far too memorable to be forgotten. The honored ghosts reappeared to give to Tan Po their haste and bygone glory, prayers wishing in the wind, with every soldier passing a dreamed majestic story. In their ethereal hearts a forlorn salute, their thundering spirits to their destined fates, roaring against what killed their kin, their only lineage, and everything they loved. Their materializing forms passing in the mists and wind from beyond, supernatural spectres armed to bring their full strength to bear, their physical phantoms intangible now to the natural world, yet Tan Po could see them in their final charging moments, sacrificed in their ardent zeal to reclaim their once flourishing empire. Their many armed phantasms charging upward, a horde of their best and most well-trained men, these noble-blooded Ixar fated to fight the newly usurping fiend. Their ghosts speeding toward the chamber above, up and around the corner, fading into the unusual winds, up the treacherous pathway built into the cavernous wall. Tan Po was emboldened in this moment. Everything he had lived for became one with him. It was as if the army who had aspired to bring his doom, their crushed and vanished souls in the ruins of the jungle, became one with the spirits who upheld the honor and kin of all Ixar in this one momentous reflection of the past. To aim to do their best, their whole lives a song, singing solemnly past Tan Po, upward toward the dragon who in that time then had become a newly risen undead. living past his mortal wound, dealt in fierce counter by the bastion holding out against Trachanon, reborn to eternity by the hidden power of veneral Sathir's discovered soul phylactery, taking root in the furthest reaches of the dungeon, the foreboding place where now was steps away from Tom Poe's resolve. One revenant, an impressive soldier, less translucent and present, more tangibly existent in the fog that his noble form did surround, the last, behind the entire army that rushed by, a general of these men who knew the end was near, slow on a march beyond in its dimension and time, a vehement warrior leader with a zeal that brought the entire pillar of flame to rise, supporting every soldier's resolve, its blade and shield even moving the mist above as the honorable lizard men turn around to Tom Poe, as if to say goodbye, to whisper in formation across the vast expanse of time, in a tenebrous movement of his old scales, imparting a somber yet perseverant gaze. The magnificent general quickly removed an intricate necklace of bone, feathers, and gems, placing it on the end of his spear, flinging it from his very decorated right arm. With an upwards diagonal swing, the necklace tangibly emerging from the wraith's throw, the feathers flying, materializing again in the forsaken monk's own era, slowly sinking into the water in the steep chasm below, where it drifted downward to the depths. Tom Poe saw the darkened gems and bones disappear into the deep water as the ghostly general, resigned to his death, left an old mysterious tome placed among the speleothems, perhaps the telling of his life in all of his battles he led. The revenant looked deeply from the heart into the beyond toward the direction of Tom Poe, as if staring through, knowing every mortal to be a ghost, sensing in Tom Poe a pure soul, two brave warriors who fought many battles, the ill-omened ghostly warlord from the interior abyss, staring over the void at another set to proceed with a battle fought as strong as 300 men of his own. With mighty clawed feet, his scaled hand holding his old ancestral bone spear, pulled out his bulky and unwieldy shantok blade with the other grasp, and with zeal turned to follow his men. He walked slowly and dignified, and then in a quick flight of fury charged to catch up with the rest, the leader moving in front of their numbers and rear guard with due respect to get to the front, as every embattled ghost hissed and fought on bravely in their doomed past to inevitably fall. Only Tom Poe's presence here created the shrieks and howls of the ghastly attacking Ixar Phantom Brigade, sound that ricocheted from the cavernous maw, the vile den very close. The wind from rocky tunnels hidden among grand stalactites and clusters of stone began to slow. As Tom Poe held the wall to his back, he heard the ghosts' fleeting final battle vaunting, fading in echoes, the aural resonance powerful in their lamented abyss, the cavern mist gathering once more. A silence fell upon the expansive chasm, and the fog filled the air surrounding, as the sounds of the last hope of the overtaken Ixar Empire faded, the ghosts vanishing in the cloaking mist. The silence was pristine and revered. Tom Poe felt the rocks to his side, climbing steadily, strafing up the carved crag to his honored fight that awaited. Trachanon lay quiet, the whole time the ghostly brigade raided to defend again in their haunting dimension. A space in the mist where Tom Poe saw the eidolon warlord place his lifelong journal among the stalagmites very close to the dragon's lair he sat down by, knowing the vile creature was confined to its quarters, with time to ponder. He heard the dragon pant and growl as he entered a dream in meditation, a silent chimera with a mudra but no mantra, of wistful wish and revelations. The old haunted tiger Grand Master's soul drifted beyond the plane of tranquility, where on an island he saw vivid elder drakes hovering by lore-keepers of the old scrolls and tomes and ancient libraries that lined the shores along the distant shimmering blue sea, where across the water Ton Po would become like the waves, running free over the beautiful ocean, levitating in the omnidirectional winds, the picturesque scenery, the embodiment of the consciousness of the youthful goddess Quellius, her dream. With rising inspired visions of grandeur, Ton Po glided over a hill on the island coast, ascending to the plane of sky, hovering up over floating islands in the glorious ether, where the Ifriti noble Dajorn, the crystalline winds, the impish Azaracs, mystic unicorns, and Siren the lunatic would remain, who to each island held all the keys, with cryptic moonstruck phrases to test each seeker, whether they would climb the islands higher to see the sister of the spire, the Eye of Vishan that watched from afar, and Bazet Zit, the queen of Bixies. To the island where unicorns, and the keeper of souls, the great majestic Pegasus, the master of its island, vast whitened wings that kept it hovering over the timeless winds that eroded even the island, chained in the sky. The grand, magical, blithe beast that floated endlessly over the world in the altered plane was the embodiment of wishes in the ether that never returned to the world, due to tragic plague, somber scorn, leading to dream death, the physical phantoms amongst mortals that haunted the ethereal mist, auras being disenchanted, reflecting everything oppressive by evils that could phantasmically strike those with strength to make the weak understand. Their souls struck with imagined ferocity, wide awake within their self-deceit, by imposing malicious spite to others, and the flying keeper, oblivious to the foul, baleful deeds of mortals. The Pegasus was a part of every wish gone awry, deserved dreams to those who faded less than shadows, away from the whole world, and their true reason their souls were given life. Unable to find their destiny, fate was the hunter succumbing their precious souls that the keeper held, until a more fortuitous and inspirative, lofty, higher thought, another path in hope and high whimsical dream, could carry their spirits on until they found their way. The thoughts, part of the trees and treants below in the world, these ascended islands chained in the ephemeral breeze that one day would end by the Creator's hand, held their positions drifting, waiting in the sky, unknown to the trivial, menial tasks of most mortal men. The Keeper of Souls held a kind regard to Ton Po. Once there, he was to save his disciple's life. The lesson was bravery, to vanquish any fearful facade. His disciple many decades ago had to jump off an island with Ton Po to evade the soul harvesters that were like tendrils on a piranha plant, the claws of a bird of prey. The tall unicorns were so vividly beautiful, their brilliant white manes, and long spiked spindling horns. Their freedom on their one island told of their patient virtuosity, though these great unicorn beasts would attack with a silent mercilessness that would appear as fury against any being that came to their land. As Ton Po and his student, a monk in training, Kumorushai, stood on the edge of the wide-open space, they studied everything about the altar plane of sky, the rare ether that surrounded them, their spirits heavenly free. Kumorushai had a quest in his karma, given by an oracle who knew the difficult steps he was to take, the challenge representing the rewards thereafter, no mountain worth climbing but that which was higher, the scenery vastly more lucid, breathtaking beyond belief. Ton Po, knowing the seed of this disciple had grown, the more hardier he will become. Through drought and strife, the plant remains strong. As they walked the island, searching for a lost key to reach the Afriti lord they were to defeat, taking note of the glyphs, where to get to the right island, the soul harvesters flew down from above to guard their island home. Kumoroshai became unnerved, and his steady walk turned into a skip, starting to run. Ton Po looked up as the sun flashed in his sight, like the blinding powder the froglock Nocta shaman would craft to throw into their enemies' eyes. The unicorns dashed with calm ferocity. The magical beasts were there to guard their ancient duty. The wishes and dreams carried in the hearts of men were one with their flying wings, their pale pinions, their horns to defend that which was sacred. Thinking the two monks were dream thieves or lost adventurers, they swooped down quick to assail their expedition. Looking the other way, the two monks saw Siren the lunatic tread slow in the distance, the halfling keymaster, the reason for most journeys up to the plane of sky. He ran towards the halfling, a rare leprechaun seen only at certain times to get the key to the next island, 5. Ton Po, dazed by the glare of the heavens, the white wings descending on his position, rolled across the unearthly plain, his trained movements bolstered by the magic here. Where there is a will, a way always appears. He came to the edge of the abyssal winds, not a dark chasm, but heavenly heights where he looked out into the endless sky. Only wings would save him now. Kumoroshai jumped over Siren the lunatic, while the harvesters went back up into the air after charging below at Ton Po. Kumoroshai had remembered he had guarded the barricades of his people before he met Ton Po in their battle to defend his temple. After landing on his feet, his long hair all over his face, memory of the place he defended he recalled, one with the wall where he stopped invading Sarnak from destroying the way to his temple's fane, his homeland soul. Though previously complacent, quickly Siren the lunatic attentively looked in Kumoroshai's direction. The mad halfling began to rush at the monk. Keys inside his many pockets clashed like unspent platinum pieces. As Kumoroshai kept jumping over the enraged halfling, his hits known to be very powerful. Ton Po was evading the unicorns, that were naturally docile and placid beasts. Not wanting to lessen any of their number, he dodged their many rushes to knock him off their abode. Kumoroshai ran back to Ton Po, with Siren the lunatic shouting inane lines, chasing him to cast him off the island's side. Ton Po kept the beasts busy, while Kumoroshai ran towards. The Keeper of Souls shimmered in the light over a hill on this floating island, keeper of all the wishes and dreams not consummated in the lives of every soul, flew gallantly from afar, past the tower at the center, its great godly wings encompassing much visual space, eclipsing the sun, its hooves marching in the wind to defend the great unicorn's home. Ton Po, unarmed, knew of this creature, in folklore and myth, that it had a touch of death that could sever any mortal breath. By intuitive reflex and precise flowing movements of finesse, Ton Po kept jousting with flying kicks and hits in the wind, knowing that once the keeper came, him or Kumoroshai would die, even if death they feigned. As Kumoroshai darted across the magically imbued landscape, Siren the lunatic pulled a chain from his buttoned vest, the raging halfling spinning a metal-linked lasso rope above his head, a cruel hook attached to the end. Kumoroshai was running to Ton Po so they could fight together back to back, or escape, which now seemed their best defense. Kumoroshai slid under the chain swung in his direction, and with great agility dived towards the island's edge. His leg now wrapped in Siren the lunatic's lasso, the unicorn still attacking Ton Po, who pulled Kumoroshai against the mad halfling's tug of war. The chains came free, and the two monks had to jump from the island. There was no chance of reaching the other from here and surviving. Komoroshai fell towards Tan Po after his struggle. Though quick and agile, he lost his footing, and fell off the high island. He grabbed a root at its side and held on for dear life. Tan Po rushed and jumped as Komoroshai had fallen. The unicorns, though sullen, had been called by the Keeper of Souls to allow it to finish. Siren the lunatic was gathering his chains still, and the root at the island's side Tan Po held on to. It was a long gnarl that was magically imbued. He saw the root was giving way, and Komoroshai lost his grip on the stick that Tan Po held alone now, his precious disciple drifting downward in a fall to plunge into the deep sea below. Tan Po looked into Komoroshai's eyes with fist clenched, a somber goodbye as he fell through the clouds into the atmosphere. Hopefully he thought he would see his disciple again. The stick began to feel like a weapon to Tan Po. Quickly seeing it was just the right dimensions for his body and hands, a great understanding of his situation flowed through him, from imbued root to man, and Siren the lunatic gazed awestruck at the majestic Keeper of Souls, throwing down his chain, surrendering to the beast's wrath. Tan Po knew he could be gripped by a deathly touch, and as the Keeper of Souls dived swiftly at Tan Po, he struck the beast enough to stun it, for no mortal could fight this foe alone without being rended of their soul, and no mortal had ever touched upon its aura or its form in the many eons the Keeper of Souls with its harvesters roamed. This weapon, Tan Po's bow stick of understanding, procured a stun that dazed the Pegasus, for how long Tan Po did not yet know, the weapon being imbued with the aura of the Keeper of Souls, as if being blessed with the weight of the gods. If he fought on, he would die here alone. So with his new weapon, he dove off the side of the island floating in the sky, through the clouds, falling into the winds, caught adrift in varied directions, as if cyclone or typhoons roared below on the sea, past the fleeting memory of Komoroshai, a sad understanding. Tan Po had taught his disciple well before their journey to the islands in the sky, and gave him magical boots to levitate before upon the sea landing. Tan Po wore them the same, and floated gently, hovering down towards the waves that were placid. Komoroshai would be too distant now, for Tan Po had drifted far away by crosswinds that carried him to another place. He saw a ship in the distance as he turned and headed towards the fair winds and high sails in the masts ahead, for it was the maiden's voyage, and these calm reflective waves were one with the ocean of tears, where sirens and cyclops lived on distant islands that tempted fate. Tan Po, missing his disciple, drifted into the direction of the ship, his memory fading, the beautiful sunset in the distance a deep orange. To the desert of Ro he would go to find another disciple there Komoroshai knew, a young Ronin. The mist drifted in his seemingly forsaken endeavor in the depths of Old Sibyllus, where Tan Po opened his eyes past the light of his final memory of a sunset and wish to see his one beloved wife again. Blue will-o'-the-wisps floated around his head. Through Tan Po's meditation, reflecting on his disciple and the understanding everyone seeks, this time in the form of a powerful weapon that once touched a godlike creature, giving it the ability to hit with 100 blows, stunning any beast or human. Tan Po, for the first time on his entire journey, felt an extreme, tearful, poignant, touching sadness in his heart and soul, eclipsing his destiny like moonlight on a placid lake, a reflection for all those he knew and loved, gone now, drifting away. In his eyes only into shadows now would he fade. His soul welled deep, He remembered when he made love to his wife at the well by their village, showing Ton Po how far down her soul would reach at the bottom of the well, the bucket in relation to every humanly woe, that when she, with her delicate fingers, gathered up the rope, twisting the winch, she showed how low emotions could go after such a happy time in their lives, but always bringing to the surface a pristine clarity of inspiration, a reward of soul, as far down as one would have to go, what in sadness was sacrificed. She removed from the bucket petals she slowly strained from the water in her hand by the moonlight. Ton Po lifted himself up onto his feet. He could not believe it was the ghost of his dear wife drifting in the fog. She in silent spirit had been with him, protecting his whims to let him live as long as he could. His ebbing time, soon perhaps with her soul as one again in heaven. Above the chasm, at Ton Po's final hour, they stood. Ton Po showed her the special nettled petal pouch, to give her the memory she gave him, as a breeze carried the petals toward her gentle direction. Her large, bright eyes shined with a sweetness that gave Ton Po's soul a kind resurrection. The Grand Master had a tear flow down his cheek, staring at her with a deep affection. With a flowing, translucent gown, she walked to her one great love, the tiger's eyes meeting hers. A phantasmic kiss from the ether beyond stilled his soul dreaming. Nothing as powerful touched him but when she lived. His time with her forever and always. They started to hug, but her phantom faded into Ton Po, vanishing just past his soul. Around the stone corner, the fierce Trachanon awaited. An aura of heat permeated from the acidic, poisonous pools of living, deadly venom that seeped from the dragon's scales and breath, its hunger for chaos forever in its unsatiated depths, awaiting all enemies, any mortal, and any foe willing to fight to its death. Ton Po, the old tiger, finally stepped into the dragon's lair. Trachanon lay here with no brood, just savage intent to kill. The great Ton Po rushed headlong to close the gap before the dragon was fully aware of his presence. Though Trachanon knew his every step, it had awakened fully to the lair's threat, and bellowed the loudest Ton Po had ever heard a dragon roar, with its dark green skin and outstretched maw filled with large and long, razor-sharp teeth dripping with venomous fluids. The dragon raised itself up on all four massively clawed-taloned feet, approaching Ton Po, while he ran in close to bring the pain to the wicked dragon, to quell its suffering, its spread and vile on death. Once in its evil toxic winds as it roamed the land, it raised many an innocent village, a widespread havoc when it took flight on the jungle many ages ago, where with its innate venom ruined everything from old Civilis to the west. His toughest battle yet, to bring the evil creature insurmountable defeat in its unrest. The dragon's eyes glowing in the dim dark while it started charging, with poisonous clouds that began to gather around the creature, materializing ever so slowly. Ton Po met with the dragon, crushing its vile flight towards the Grand Master with a series of his most powerful strikes. His disciplines over the years all here in one grand fight, hitting the dragon with all his might with his bow stick of understanding, the dragon nearly stunned from Ton Po's relentless barrage of intensely inner-flamed fluid combinations. Ton Po sought to massively damage his foe, taking advantage of its stasis and sleep it had lurked in, not knowing any weakness the dragon had, its flesh in places but not all, wrapping close to bone, its structure very strong, an array of deadly adaptations, and its undeath making it tumultuously powerful. Ton Po had years of training on his side, quick and lithe, empowered with raw spirit and deep insight. He saw visions of grandeur, as if an enchanter had cast it upon his soul. Ton Po laid in his most heaviest wrath with highly destructive hits, while Trachanon continuously roared aloud, swinging its large neck, its spiked horns atop his head, around toward the great tiger to rip open the mortal flesh of his foe. Trachanon missing Ton Po every round it sought his blood. Moving in the monk's direction, Trachanon used its weight to trample the embattled monk. Ton Po wanted to go for its eyes, to wreak havoc on its few weaknesses, and continue to hit strongly wherever it exposed its flesh. Trachanon's large wings spread. Though undead, Ton Po managed to hit effectively the gargantuan creature, screeching loudly down at the old tiger, his celestial fists singing a robust harmony, sending Ton Po a brilliant, wondrous rapidity, his bow stick striking with a stunningly quick velocity. 100 blows procuring from every angle he jousted to hit the fierce dragon, rendering even its undeath unable to strike or return counter blows decisively. The velocity of the celestial tranquility created a glowing aura emanating from his celestial fists that drove Ton Po into a flowing, heightened state of mind. An amazing flow of bow stick strikes, while the dragon inevitably sought to bring him into its lair enough to envenom the entire area where Ton Po took the fight. The monk's rhythm at times was blurringly quick. Trachanon could destroy whole raids in the time Ton Po had now lasted against. The mighty dragon manifested the poisonous clouds that swarmed slowly into existence, that spread through its lair, the greenish vapor fogging Ton Po's sight as he retreated along the wall out of the dragon's area of effect distance. Ton Po felt the poisonous wrath upon his skin, even though he evaded the dooming green mist, the monk having sustained resistance. The battle of attrition, hard to maintain against this dire element undeath, would inescapably reign, as it silently reigned in its lair within the vile cloudy toxins of pain. Ton Po breathed in the essence of fresh air that flowed in from the cavernous wind tunnels, countering the dragon's affinity to envelope the monk with its swathing circle of agony. Ton Po, with his back to the tall stone wall carved by the old Sibilician Empire in its height of power, leapt away from the poison vapors. Trachanon glowered in its silent movements, though Ton Po could feel the ground shake, waiting for the right moment to attack through the mist, dashing around the wall, striking like a snake. Trachanon's wing was smashed by the mighty bow stick, stunned for precious seconds in time, allowing by a quick move for Ton Po to climb up the dragon's deathly form, hitting the heaving mythical monster again with sustained inner flame, crushing through Trachanon's scales at its neck, sliding down its back. Trachanon swung its head side to side to shake the Grandmaster away from his hits that relentlessly maimed. A phantasm appeared when Ton Po's fight against the dragon seemed to be in vain. Though Trachanon suffered from the monk's devastating hits, its frame was very strong. No mortal had ever done as much damage as Ton Po in his raging storm. This ghost appeared as Ton Po was crawling back towards the mountainous corner to evade the next stream of poison Trachanon would spray. This ghost Ton Po saw as he climbed to his feet, looking around. The ghost was a familiar face, one it had not shown before, even by the Trachanon's teeth graves. It was the ghost of his father, his long-dead father, who fought once long ago to save his son's life the same. His father appeared quite young compared to Ton Po, for he had died many years ago protecting his son, his mortality phasing into existence here again. For many years he haunted Sibilis, searching for Trachanon's weakness unfound in this dungeon deep under the ground. The ghostly mirage had a stature like Ton Po, and he slowly materialized into sinew and living soul. He had found part of the phylactery Trachanon used to give itself immortality in the darkness of many years alone. The young father nodded at his son with vehement honor, and as Ton Po flipped onto his feet once more, They both charged at the vile dragon, with powered strikes so quick the dragon could not retaliate, nor gather the venom from its gullet to envenom these two brave fighting souls joined in chaos. Family, one blood against the mighty dragon that was getting no weaker from every hit they walloped in fate. Coveted primal blazing through infinite apparitions. Speed unmatched from years of practice. Memory of chained souls trapped in planar worlds. Pride within, enjoyment like water flows. The winds twist solo, but join in a flow when the chimera isn't a mirage. Hearts always yearn. Even a flame may eclipse the shadow wrought. The fight lasted minutes that seemed to be eternal as Tompo's father stepped through the shadows, perhaps a move he learned from his years as a haunt behind the dragon. Trakenon was vying to finish the two. He swung his head, the spikes for horns on its head slashing through the mist. Tompo had already taken a hit. A claw slashed his chest, but dodging the ferocious beast, an aura slamming Trakenon in its guts among its misplaced ribcage. Tompo hit with haste. His father would take mortal form soon if he fought with all his spirit, but somehow Trakenon knew what would become of him, and quickly ended his father's deathly dance. To avoid letting that man gain a very powerful form, he cursed the ghost for fighting back, for all the years in Sibyllus he roamed. Tompo's father turned away from the spews of venom which warped his soul. He began to twist and onto his back roll. Tompo kept fighting with all his might. His wound was very severe, the first wound to ever take such a high toll on his mortal form. The dragon was unconquerable. No mortal should dare attempt such a fight. Tompo had to take arms against Trakenon, though finally. It was his sacred right. For all the dread it had caused, and loathed destruction from its maw, unstoppable undeath, this deep into the dungeon in spite. Tompo remembered a move his master Yusenkeng had shown him when their number was down to only them versus many overpowering Ixar warriors in a doomed fight to the death. Back to back they fought them for dear life. Tompo's father's ghost had forgotten the venom would cause his form to wisp away, and even worse, he was becoming a ghoul, a tall ghoul that could perhaps damage Trakenon, his form twisting due to the dragon's curse, growing into a massive ghoul from behind Trakenon's wings, his arms in front of him on the ground as if chained. Tompo thought the dragon was trying to control his father's soul in a damned undeath, an eternal necromantic plaything. So he fought ever so quickly, as Trakenon roared while Tompo had performed his destructive move with his bow stick. Trakenon crawling around the dead-end chamber spewing venom. But knowing the dragon could feel little pain, Tompo sought to find its weakness in vain. Trakenon rushed with mists of venom towards him. Trakenon's claws connected again with his bare chest as he struck one final blow on the dragon's head. The blood began to flow, and Tompo's father was battling, becoming a charmed ghoul. He grew taller and taller until he reached close to the stalactites, his visage a menacing sight to behold, full of a warrior's rage, and crushed back at the beast with his dark, deadly fists that crushed Trakenon into submission. Only a mortal could finish the fight versus this mighty undead dragon. Yet Tompo lay weak behind some dripstone formed from many years here in the darkness, his bow stick lost now, perhaps stolen by the dragon, collector of relics. Tompo's father, with all his new undeathly might, struck several mighty blows versus Trakenon, but alas, it would take a mortal's hand to finish the fight. Trakenon ripped and tore at Tompo's father, now a massive ghoul form, as it sought and fought to find where his son had gone. Trakenon, though weak, clawed at this newly risen gargantuan ghoul, severing much of its tendon and flesh, as it stomped over to Ton Po, reaching for his son with a weakened soul, his arms clawed and envenomed, melting slow. Ton Po would die here if the ghoul, his father, would not help. The tall ghoul grabbed Ton Po, his undead father, and carried him in his arms, as if a remembrance of when he held him when he was born. The weakened Grandmaster, unable to carry on the fight due to a loss of blood. The great tall ghoul shielded Ton Po from further damage, as Trakenon rose up for the first time in the fight on its hind legs, and clawed in a continued fury, persistently digging its baneful talons deep into Ton Po's father, this ill-fated ghoul, seeking to save his dear son, while in an agony wallowed, a cursed abomination from all his years of torment, excruciating pain averted in undeath, and like a jaded soul, kept walking towards the water to drop Ton Po into the depths, hoping one of the underground rivers that flowed would save his son's soul. As the dragon tore the ghoul's flesh away, Ton Po's eyes closed, the ghoul protecting Ton Po with his shoulders, and his massive arms with plenty of muscle and rind for the dragon to dig through before the ghoul made it to the water, freedom for his dear son's life. As the overgrown ghoul steadily marched his final steps toward the high cavern plateau edge, Trakenon mercilessly fought harder than even against Ton Po, screaming venom that shredded the ghoul's back, slashing with the sharpest weapons any creature could bear, the talons of Trakenon, melting the ghoul little by little. It came to the edge of the cavern, where the tall ghoul dropped Ton Po into the deep depths of the watery pool below, taking the idol from his neck. Ton Po fell, weakened but still alive, and plunged into the abyss of the underground river by the dragon's lair aside. Being so tall, the ghoul was weakened by extreme damage to its limbs, for it could no longer fight. As Trakenon kept the battle ongoing with slashes of its claws, the large fangs of its jaws bellowing deadly streams of venom at the ghoul's hide, Ton Po's father, his last moments of consciousness, in the grips of the dragon's death, held the idol fast, and a stalactite fell from above as the good ghoul came tumbling down, the spike right into Trakenon's wing, pinning the wrathful dragon to the ground. The ghoul here would lay out of range of the dragon's maw for many days to come, while Trakenon sought to cause the ghoul more damage with its element of undeath. The ghoul slowly shrank, its bones exposed, and melted away in the dark lair. Ton Po's father, his quest, many years a ghost to haunt the ruins, finally found honorable death. Ton Po was caught in the rapids of the river below the dragon's lair. The red fluid flowed away from his wound, cleansed by the pure waters where such a cursed dragon called home. The rapids took him far away from the dungeon, perhaps to the rivers where he and Yu King had trained. His fight versus Trakenon had not been in vain. The dragon was slowly dying anyway. It would be finished eventually. A dream overtook Ton Po, where he again went to the ether very high for being dragged so low. From physical attachment habit is built. Ego, the hardest thing in the human psyche to discard, within the beings of souls who inhabit the world. A greater sense of ourselves, incalculable and unforeseeable. Castles of sand eroded unkind by waves ever-changing soul character. We all must die. Zenail Raijitsu, the monk of the curse, could not be by Ton Po's side at this trying time, as he was fighting the Ixar in the jungle around Sibyllus outside. He stood high up on one of the many Ixar statues and said, "When the time comes, I will be here, beyond the mist, deeper into the shadows, vexing any who may wander near. Though my soul, whatever is left, beckons me to stay, I must leave this place of torment, all the vast swamps of Kunark, the fields of lingering decay. Far too many times I was close to an end. The sorrow goes on, like a distant wrath, a portent closer each day. For all the unveiling before our eyes, life is here and love is nearby. Foggy distances of spirited winds, raw gusts stealing me away. The dark monk fades into the night. Ton Po's spirit resides in the plane of sky, his immortalized soul bounding ethereally to the heavens in divine moments fathomed. The Grand Master appears before his enlightened disciples at their most important times from across the waves of eternity in the afterlife, to move a branch hidden, which may distract the moment when a man discovers within himself the beauty of pure inspiration in his nature. What in tranquility gives clarity inspirationally, or with great chi moves the wind when an arrow may come close to striking, making sure that in the most dire moments of his disciples' time they are supplied the weapon to keep safe their higher vibrancy of life, to vanquish unevolved enemies, their souls that only live to strife, who are truly illusions, unrealized in their own darkness, that seek foes because they have not created truth nor learned from the void for themselves. Dwelling in evil, they only reap what they sow. He is there to protect precious dreams from those with none to share, who work in rudimentary linear rhythms, their passions spiritless, not a flame to give, untouched arctic reaches uninspired, thieves of real soul zeal that is the true flare of the dreamers, slumbering deep, silently sometimes in a glacier, like Caraphirum the sleeper. It is said to this day that the spirit of Ton Po treads where every great battle is fought within the soul, recognizing victory over illusion, quelling all suffering, inspirations of true, purest heart, and the inner dwellings of soul, when men stand for what is beautiful and sacred to them, even in illuminated sacrifice, and in what man gives, even in silence, what we can love. The End. The Legend of Ton Po by T. F. Lanning. Final edits and release of eBook on 11/1/2021. My recording finished on 12/29/2021. Cast of characters starring Grandmaster Ton Po, Zenail Raijitsu, Velsraic Ysambril, the mysterious monk ninja woman, Yu Senkeng, the chieftain shamaness Zel Kefra, Kumoroshai, Scorn Skullfire, Ton Po's wife, Ton Po's father, the ghost, the man, the ghoul, the Ixar Phantom General.